AI answers because you asked. It doesn't answer because it knows. Hallucination is an inbuilt feature of AI tools, which means that anyone who's using them for any purpose has to understand that it is bound to hallucinate. If it's meant to be an everything tool, it's probably a nothing tool when it comes to expertise. But what you have done is evasion of your own learning. You have evaded learning, and you have put yourself in a position where it's difficult for you to get help because no one has any real insight into your process and what might have gone wrong in your interaction with AI tools. If you want to learn how to write in a persuasive way, just spend some time on the academic writing phrase bank or the academic phrase bank. So whenever assignments turn up with one of these features among many others, right? So it's just one thing that could be random, but usually if you have certain factors going together, then you become more confident that an assignment is AI implicated. So let's talk about AI and the 6 things, in my view, that people need to understand when they engage with AI tools. The first one comes from a colleague of mine, so it's a stolen one, but it's an important one. AI answers because you asked. It doesn't answer because it knows. So a common excuse that we get from people who use these AI tools is that I didn't know. So because I didn't know, I turned to an AI tool for an answer. But it doesn't mean that the answer that AI gave you is correct because you asked AI. It just gave you an answer because you asked. And this is where usually it becomes important for people to have some level of understanding of the things that they're going to use AI over. Because if something looks off, then you're able to push back and you're able to be critical until you get somewhere near decent. So when you don't know, the worst place to turn for answers is an AI tool because it will answer because you asked. It's not going to answer because it knows. And if you have no way of evaluating what it is telling you, then this is where you start to get into problems with the AI tools in academic writing. I'm going to talk about those issues later. The second thing, and this one is very, very important, is that AI doesn't understand language. It doesn't understand language in the way you and I understand language. So it understands language in a very mathematical way, right? So it gets these functions and it learns these probabilities, like these words tend to go together. So if I string them together, I'm making something that is coherent. And then it also learns like what sort of answers usually will be a hit when someone asks or when they prompt it. And then they try to capitalize on these things more and more. So I also hear people who usually will say, oh, I used AI to simplify this because I didn't quite understand it. And for most of the part, it might simplify things, but it might also compromise the actual meaning of those things because it does not understand language. It works with probabilities in order to generate something that you can understand. So within its underlying logic is still a lot of coding that happens and not necessarily a decoding of language and then putting together something that speaks directly to that. It's like, okay, for most of the part, the answer is going to be within this region and is going to get those things right. In my experience, actually, so far with using these tools, which is funny enough, is that I think for translation, they tend to be good. But for anything else, for everyday things, like if I would like to get something explained, I'm usually better off just trying to find something written somewhere by a human than trying to get the AI explanation or summary of that thing. And then the third and also very, very important thing, AI will lie. It's not that it might lie. It's not that it might hallucinate. It will hallucinate. So when these tools first came out, one of the things that was said, what was considered to be a bug to be fixed, was indeed the hallucination. And there was a race to try to eliminate the hallucination, because if you do that, then of course you're going to get more accuracy. Then somewhere down the line, they turned the narrative, whether it was for legitimate reasons or something else, I wouldn't know. But they then turned around and said, no, hallucination is a feature of these AI tools. They have built in some natural randomness that allows us to get more variation in the output that AI generates, right? It might be what makes stories more exciting. If it tells the same story over and over again, things go wrong. So if it randomly makes something up, then hopefully that is going to increase the divergence and might make things a bit more interesting. So hallucination is an inbuilt feature of AI tools, which means that anyone who's using them for any purpose has to understand that it is bound to hallucinate. And if you are not able to detect those hallucinations, this is usually where your problems also start. And then it takes us back to the first point that, because it answers because you asked, it doesn't necessarily know. There's a level of responsibility on you to understand what it is doing and to be able to double check what it is going to say. But it is a given, it is going to hallucinate. Now, there are some tools that are coming out that people are saying are built to be specialized and they do specific things. Like recently, I saw this post from a community who say they've put together an AI tool for literature reviews, and they claim that it's better than the PhD level in terms of what it generates. It's not something that I have tested myself, but I can understand that if you narrow the scope, it gets better. But if it still depends on the same underlying logic, I am not sure if you would then be expecting that you eliminate the hallucination. But I think if you go across the board, across the different groups of experts when it comes to AI, they will in general agree that it is bound to hallucinate. And some of them will tell you that this hallucination is something that is inbuilt, right? It's meant to diversify the output of AI. But when it comes to academic writing, it's dangerous territory because it starts making stuff up, and we're not meant to make stuff up. Then the fourth thing that I find very, very problematic with AI tools is that they are built to please. And some people still argue that with the right prompts, you can actually force it to do things a bit differently. But even when I read AI-generated essays, I think one of the things that's usually off-putting is how they tend to lean more towards being praising or being complimentary of certain things. And yet in academic writing, we will usually take a distance when it comes to a firm position about whether something is done well or not. So we will tend to stick to the facts, and we would expect that those facts speak for themselves. So the way that it just tries to please also means that usually the writing becomes wishy-washy, and it doesn't lend itself very well as a tool for some kind of critical discourse, because it's going to gravitate towards something that's either more neutral or something that's more polite. That is not exactly helpful when it comes to academic writing. And then the fifth thing is that it is wayward. So I still don't use AI for my academic writing, but I am unfortunately forced to use Google every once in a while. And whenever you use Google now, by default, the first thing that's going to come up is the AI summary, right? Then you have to dig through a few more things before you actually get to some relevant sources. But what tends to happen is that when you ask these simple questions, these AI tools are going to answer the question and then offer up more information. And when they offer up more information, sometimes this information is wrong or misleading. So this wayward nature of AI tools also usually would lead people to places they didn't need to go when it comes to academic writing. So I will give an example, when it comes to some assignments that are suspicious in terms of whether AI was used or not. One of the common things is that students will bring up theories that were not taught, for example, or have nothing to do with this particular subject or topic that you're dealing with, or might even be from outside the discipline. So whenever assignments turn up with one of these features, among many others, right? So it's just one thing that could be random. But usually if you have certain factors going together, then you become more confident that an assignment is AI implicated. But this wayward nature actually usually means that people go outside the scope of what was covered within a module, and they end up saying things that don't make any sense to an expert reader because they wouldn't fit actually the scope of the problem or even the scope of the discipline. So that's one thing to be mindful of when you use these tools. And if for you to know that it's gone wayward on you and it's offered you something that's useless, you're going to have to engage with the learning materials, and you're going to have to know what has actually been covered or taught. And then finally, and this one I think would apply in any case, we used to talk about someone who's a jack of all trades but master of none. I think this is the place where we are with AI tools. It's an everything tool. It's meant to address so many things that in the end, it doesn't really stand out for anything specific. And within academic writing, then we are thinking about the different disciplines that we have, the different traditions within those disciplines, and how AI just struggles at the end of the day to be able to do something that is actually outstanding, because it's not deepening its understanding. So in academia, academic writing, or even when you're doing a degree, these are very specialized areas of study, right? So if I will do a degree in social work, or I will do a degree in economics, there's some very specialist knowledge that professors in that discipline have been working for more than sometimes 50 years, and they're still learning those things. So if it takes someone half a century to get to the level of knowledge that we're able to use and trust, and then you're going to take a generalist tool and you're going to expect that it's going to be able to understand all these different expertise and all these disciplines, it's a problem. But then it ties into the second issue that I mentioned about the fact that it doesn't understand language, but it is trained to mimic certain things, and it's going to offer things up each time that you try to use it. So just understand that if it's meant to be an everything tool, it's probably a nothing tool when it comes to expertise, deep expertise, and actually being able to generate something that is meaningful. So these are the things that you need to be able to understand, and I think you need to keep them in mind when you engage with AI tools. That's the very basic understanding that you need to have so that you're able to proceed with caution. And then you're able to also look out for any signs of danger in terms of the information that it gives you, but also how you might become reliant on them. So having described these things, what are the biggest issues when it comes to academic writing and AI tools? I think there are two fundamental things that we will usually be concerned about that usually end up compromising people who use these tools. The first is that facts are important. So in academic writing or in academic research, we don't make things up, right? So if I state something as fact, it has to be indeed a fact. And then the second thing is that it's not enough for me to state a fact. I have to give you the sources that you can check yourself and verify that this is a fact. So these two things are very, very fundamental, and they're very crucial when it comes to academic writing. So what are the facts and what are the references that you are providing that other people can cross-check to establish that you have indeed given them a fact? So when it comes to using AI tools, and this happens with a lot of the marking that I do, it's usually going to show up, first of all, in the reference list. If someone has hallucinated references, it's already casting doubt on the authenticity of the work and the extent to which it can be trusted. So if a reference is made up, it means that the claims are also made up. But also it can happen that a reference is not made up. So someone gives a real reference, but the claims attributed to that reference are made up. So just imagine, for example, someone citing a 2015 article and saying that it was about COVID. It's impossible because COVID actually happened in 2020, and a lot of the research about it actually came later in that year going forward. So AI tools will tend to do this. And this is where problems start to happen, because if an expert reader looks at it, they don't need much time to realize that something has gone wrong, right? So we will usually know who are the important names in the discipline, or who are the likely names in a discipline or for an assignment that is given. So if we don't recognize the name, we are going to check that name. Like, where did this author come from? Because we don't know them. And for sure, if they're associated with the top journals, we usually will know who typically hits those top journals. So that usually becomes a red flag. And that's, for us, the low-hanging fruit when it comes to trying to understand what happened. And then the second one just relates to claim. You know, a lot of the literature that you will cite, we will have read if it is important literature, and we will have some sense of what is in there. So if some claims are made up about a particular reference, then it's already pointing towards issues with AI use. Another thing that is important is persuasion. So in academic writing, persuasion for us works very differently. I have to present you with the facts. I have to show, for example, if I say this is a debate that has been going on for a long time, I usually will have to cite some references that contradict each other, or where there's an argument, or cite a literature review that shows all the debates that have been going on over a certain extended period of time. And then this is how we build persuasion in academic writing. It's still always pointing back to the facts, and it's not about the words that I use to persuade someone. And yet when it comes to AI tools, then they tend to use persuasion in the literal sense, right? It will say, this is the most amazing thing. And in academic, we never do that. Actually, we find it off-putting because people have to make up their own minds when it comes to certain things. We just have to present the facts, and then they should be able to piece it together to decide if it's that important or not, right? So at the end of the day, if you wouldn't understand how persuasion works in academic writing, you are more likely to take up the suggestions that are offered by AI tools to make your work persuasive, but it comes out off-putting because if it's not based on evidence and if it's not using the right words, so we have all kinds of indicators that we use in academic writing, like if I'm confident, right, I'm going to choose a different word, like it is certainly this, and if I'm not sure, I'm going to say it is likely this. So these are just simple words. They seem fleeting, but they're very important. And we put a lot of thought into the word choice because it's supposed to signpost to readers our level of confidence over things and whatnot. So if you really would like to understand how academic writing works, how we use language to achieve different things, whether it's signposting or being critical, then find the academic phrase bank that was put together by Manchester University some years back. This academic phrase bank already existed at the time that I started my PhD, and this was a long time ago, and it still exists, and it still shows you like how we use language in the academic sense. And one of the things that you will learn when you go through the academic phrase bank is that we have like very small subsets of very specific words or phrases that we use in academic writing to achieve certain things. So one of the things that people tend to make a mistake with when they use AI tools is that they try to get this variation to make things exciting. But actually, academic writing is boring and straightforward when it comes to word choice. And there are specific words or phrases that we will tend to use that are going to be important. So this is also how we know, like one of the things that usually will be a signal that something might be wrong in your academic piece of work is when your plagiarism score is 0. If you will be doing academic writing right, then you are going to use those typical words or phrases that are used in academic writing. And because they usually will be a string when it comes to phrases, that it could be anything from 2 to 4 words that are used, you are going to get a plagiarism hit because there are going to be many sources that use exactly the same words in exactly the same sequence to achieve a particular goal. So plagiarism scores of 0% are problematic because you are not really doing academic writing. We expect it to be there. That's why in some universities you get a leeway like up to 25% because your reference lists also come up sometimes flagged for plagiarism, but there are also phrases within the text that can come out hit or implicated. So when you get a 0% score, usually this is an indicator that AI has been used, because if you've actually done actual academic writing, it's impossible for you to have a 0% plagiarism score in your writing. So if you run your assignments through plagiarism checkers and you're trying to bring it to 0, you are sabotaging yourself. We know something has gone wrong in the process, because natural academic writing means that there will be certain natural linguistic markers that we use to achieve certain things, and they will be seen across a lot of bodies of academic writing, and you get a plagiarism hit for them. And when we see them, we recognize them. That's why it doesn't become a problem. You will never get called in for a plagiarism score that relates to those typical types of phrases or words that we use in academic writing. So if you want to learn how to write in a persuasive way, just spend some time on the academic writing phrase bank or the academic phrase bank. Finally, also, there are things about AI that are quirky in a sense for academic writing. And one of them that I can think about is how it looks like when you have to work with lists using AI tools, they usually do it in the way that journal news articles would write. So this is something that a linguist friend of mine pointed to me when we were doing some workshop on AI in academic writing. And they were showing how if you look at a lot of news articles and they have to give you a list of some important things, they tend to give you 3 examples. So they usually have this rule of 3 because they have a word limit. So having written for news articles myself, having written some news articles myself, I know that, for example, when I write for The Conversation, they want the word limit to be 900 words. So there's not enough space for me to list 7 principles of A. If there are 7 principles for that particular phenomenon, I might have to pick the 3 most important, but then I need context to determine which 3 out of the 7 are important for what I'm writing. But AI tools tend to just still give you a list of 3, even if those principles might be 5 or 7 or 11. And there's never a logic as to why these 3 and not the others. So this is one of the ways that we will usually know, even if the AI score comes out low. It's like, okay, for this particular concept, we know there's more than 3. So how come just these 3? And how come not discussion on that these are not the only ones? And how come not discussion on why these 3 have been chosen? So there are different kinds of markers that we get that when you put together, you know that an assignment is AI implicated. So a lot of students will usually tell themselves that all I need to do if I'm called in for a hearing is deny everything. And I will be honest, when there's no hallucination, then usually there's nothing that can be done because it's still the onus of proof is on the educators that there has been some use of AI. So absent hallucination, usually there's not much that we can do, but we will know certain things in the writing that are going to show that AI is implicated. And when people deny these things and they get away with it, I think it's fair to say that it's not always the case that the educators have been fooled. It's just that they know that they cannot prove it. And so it's not going to be the best use of their time to continue to pursue it. But what you have done is evasion of your own learning. You have evaded learning and you have put yourself in a position where it's difficult for you to get help because no one has any real insight into your process and what might have gone wrong in your interaction with AI tools. So I usually would encourage students, like if you know you did it, and you don't know how they know, it's always better to say, okay, this is what happened, because a lot of the policies are usually much more generous in the sense that your first offense is a slap on the wrist, it's almost nothing. But if they actually know from that first offense what actually happened, then you're usually able to get the help that allows you to graduate from these tools and to actually become better at understanding what you're doing and to become an expert in whatever you are doing. So this is a very important thing. Like always keep at the back of your mind, if you are let go, when you know that you use the AI tools, it's not necessarily that they didn't know. It's just that they couldn't prove it because there was no hallucination. But they know you have evaded your own learning and they are limited in their ability to help you to get back on track because you just took the position to deny everything. So that is that. I mean, I have talked about AI dependency as well and how I do think that sometimes the issues related to AI shouldn't necessarily be treated as academic integrity issues. I think sometimes we have to recognize the dependency and we're going to need different mechanisms for dealing with it. But I think formally there's no recognition that people do become dependent on AI and therefore the policies for helping students who have become dependent don't yet exist. But trying to have a conversation, an honest one with your educators might help them to understand this problem better. A lot of you just come to my mailbox, to my private inbox and say, this is what is happening. Even I am not trained on how you can actually get yourself unhooked when you've become hooked on AI. So it's going to take a bit of transparency. And I think it's going to mean that universities need to be less punitive, where students also need to be a bit more open, like ask for help if you start to see yourself lose control over your own faculties and the ability to use your mind to create new knowledge built on facts, established on facts and things that are real. Then we will get somewhere. So this is that. This is all that I had to say about AI. Just know these 6 things as part of your own literacy. AI answers because you asked. It doesn't answer because it knows. AI doesn't understand language, so it's just meant to understand how words tend to go together in a context, and it's going to put them together to give a response to your answer. AI will lie to you. Hallucination is now formally an inbuilt feature of AI tools to improve the variation in the outputs that it generates. So each time you use it, no, it will make things up. And in academic writing, that constitutes lying and is problematic. It's an academic integrity issue. Also know that it is built to please, so it doesn't lend itself very well for critical writing. Know that also it's wayward, so it tends to offer up more than is needed or is required. And then finally, also know that if it is meant to be a tool that does everything, it's a tool that's not going to stand out at anything unless it gets specifically trained towards certain things. But most of us have access to these generalist tools, which means that they're not going to be very good for what we are trying to achieve, especially when it comes to academic writing. And then when it comes to academic writing itself, the two biggest issue relates to the fact that facts are important. We can never make things up, and we must always be able to provide evidence for what we state as fact. So this is the foundation upon which academic writing happens. So hallucination then becomes a problem because it means that things get made up. And also the way that it tries to persuade people is very different from how persuasion works in academic writing. And then it has certain ways of writing that are far outside of the approach that is taken in academic writing. So I gave the example of it tends to go for this rule of three. When it lists things, it will give you 3 examples. But sometimes we have 7 principles, and all those 7 principles are important. So if it chooses 3, you have to know why those 3 and why not the others. And you need context in order to be able to select the most relevant ones. So this is me. If you do still insist on using AI tools, then understand these things about AI tools and at least build your level of knowledge to the level where those tools actually can be used productively rather than counterproductively and allowing you to evade your own learning, because it's going to catch up with you at a certain point. If it's not during the university years, for sure, when you become an employee in the job market. Right? Because when you don't know what you're doing, it's only a matter of time before people catch on that you don't know what you're doing. So invest in yourself. I think that's the biggest investment that you can make, because that's something that no one can take away from you. Knowledge is power. It is power to the person who owns it because they can wield it as they please. And if you are not accumulating that knowledge, then your uniqueness, your value, your power kind of is lost. You are beholden to something else. So that emancipation that you would have expected from a degree is not going to follow naturally because you wouldn't have actually acquired the learning and the skills that will be expected of such a process.